My siblings, please reach your hands in prayers over me. Most High, we ask that I may speak with your voice and that we may hear with your heart. Alleluia, 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 alleluia. We saw his star at its rising and have come to do him homage. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. May Christ be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Good News according to the book of Mark.
Glory to you, O Christ.
They came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and began to teach. The people were spellbound by his teaching, because Jesus taught with an authority that was unlike their religious scholars. Suddenly, a person with an unclean spirit rose up in their synagogue. The spirit shrieked, "What do you want from us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked the spirit sharply. "Be quiet! Come out of that person." At that, the unclean spirit convulsed the possessed one violently, and with a loud cry it came out. All who looked on were amazed. They began to ask one another, "What is this? A new teaching and with such authority? This person even gives orders to unclean spirits, and they obey." Immediately, news of Jesus spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. This is the gospel of our Christ.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So this is an interesting set of weeks that we've had with all kinds of callings and revelations and such. And I'm not going to guarantee this, but I think I deliberately didn't change the readings because I wanted to talk about the parts of hearing that paternalistic language again is kind of jarring when we're used to not having that. Because I want to go back and dig into Deuteronomy. I told Chris that I was tempted to just go Protestant. I take as my text today the reading from Deuteronomy 18. Because this is really the key of what our local congregational ethic is. So the verses before this are talking about how the Israelites have now come into this land and they're surrounded by people who have way different cultural and religious practices. And the Deuteronomist writes that Moses was afraid that these people, their people would start to turn away from what their cultural identity and religious practice was to these other ones. And the prophet says, instead, he will choose one of your own people to be a prophet, just like me. You must do what the prophet says. Choosing one of your own people to be a prophet. And God told Moses, they've said a right thing, and sets that up. Now, the Deuteronomist is really invested in the law, so we close it off with the law stuff, and you got to kill the wrong prophets, and you got to kill the people who say that they're prophets, and they know Deuteronomy. But the core point, when you take off all the little boom that they feel the need to put on, is that we're talking about a prophet, a teacher, a voice of God who's part of your own community, who's like you. And, well, yes, if you choose somebody who's like you, then you share language. They literally speak your language. They know and refer to your full lived experience and context. Just like it's better for us geek types to have a homilist who might drop a reference or two in there. And remember the Terminator conversation we had a few weeks ago? My geek self looked at Great Builder and Psalm, and I thought about Babylon 5, and I thought about The Wheel of Time. I had those connections. And probably Loyal was talking about the great builder because of this reading and this lore in the mind of the author. And that's a voice that our community shares. We fit a little better. Heck, me around has got Keta making more comfort with her Trek references. I don't think she did that earlier. But it's bringing more of our full self when we do. And speaking of full self, we need the banner for inclusion that's provided by me as an XTM priest. And frankly, not just our congregation needs it, our communion needs it. We need the obvious. Yeah, not only do we have queer female bishops, we've got me. And how we can reteach and retell the stories in our community in our language is how we can truly hear with the kind of hearing that we have, whatever that metaphor is. I love that it next goes to lived experience and nothing about ears at all. So we've got me as the priest looking like the standard priest, but we also have me as the priest looking like all of what I am. In our conversations, when we all get to talk, we reinforce what we as the community are hearing. And that's how we can heal each other. That's how we can be genuinely God to and for each other. That's how we can best, as Archbishop Cranmer once said, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest the teachings. Read, focus on, get into and learn, digest deep inside ourselves by having it in a way that clicks with us. And then in 1 Corinthians, we're talking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And a core piece of urban grocery reality in that era. Almost all the meat available was the leftovers from offerings in all the temples. So when we have teachings through the New Testament that focus on our own choices, our own intent, and whether we're doing something for our own good or for our own ill, that balance between knowledge and wisdom is really important as we think about how to walk gently with and for each other. And Paul says, knowledge makes us proud of ourselves, while love makes us helpful to others. Because if you know darn well that there really is one God, and that really we're not in that blood atonement thing anymore, if you've got that internalized, you're not somehow betraying your sense of who you need to be by eating leftovers from the sacrifices. But if you're not sure of that, if you're not solid in where you're at right now, if there's a portion of your brain that thinks you're eating something that's been offered to a different God, that can make you all kinds of queasy inside. It can make you feel like you're betraying yourself. That moral conflict that we talk about now as being the root of so much of our PTSD sorts of stuff. And so if you're creating a moral conflict in yourself, you're going to eat to your own harm. And if we aren't careful about how we fly our geek flag or our queer flag or whatever, to make sure that we're doing it in a way that calls people in, if we instead call people out and push people out with it, then we've created harm. And that's the thing, is you can get all puffed up in your knowledge and make a heap of trouble. So it's about representation and not creating a different group of pariahs. And that representation can really matter. There's been an interesting thing in one of my geek clubs recently about making space for all of us. And so there's been a challenge to include in our club's medieval stuff all kinds of representation of our full identities, cultural and otherwise. So somebody made for me, I'm hoping that the colors show up at all, a circlet that's an interweaving of intersex flag colors and trans flag colors. And it's a subtle thing that doesn't shout in the face in the way that some of our little costume competitions we've done recently have done. And that's got its own place to shout out joyfully who we are. But a little thing that's enough of a coder that it's seen. The people who know that and look for that feel represented. So there's different levels that we can do that at so that we're calling in as many different people as possible and not pushing people out. And I'm bringing that balance point in because that's what I see in Mark. That unclean spirit knew exactly who it was talking to. And Jesus shut it down because it would hurt the people to hear it then. And what Jesus did was to hush down the spirit and then create enough of a sideshow that nobody remembered what the spirit said. They remembered the spirit being cast out. So if you think about it, not only was that man healed, but also Jesus managed the message to bring people in, not push people out, with some really fast thinking. So I want us to have that mindfulness that there's this knowledge wisdom balance, and we need not to be jerks about our freedoms and our sense of grace. We need instead to be warmly welcoming with it. And that's what I think we're building. So there's my bits, but I want to kind of go back to that prophets of your own language thing and ask you, who have been your prophets and mentors? And where have you found those God teachings in unexpected places?